makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London with the conversations that matter, and here's what's coming up on today's program. The Hamas-run health ministry says at least 35 Palestinians have been killed in an airstrike, Israeli airstrike at a camp for displaced people in the southern city of Rafah. Well, Israel says it used precise intelligence and killed 2 senior Hamas officials. Emmanuel Macron is making a state visit to Germany, the first French president to do so in 24 years. Press will bring you the latest on Germany's business outlook in just a moment when we speak to the IFO president, Clemens Furst. Now, first thing is first, very thin trading volumes, but let's still have a look at what the European markets map is telling us. Now, again, just a reminder, the UK is closed, so ignore the FTSE 100 at the moment. The US markets are also closed. And actually, if you look at European shares across the board, they're really struggling for traction after a ECB official. This is, of course, Mr. Philip Lane warned that policy will probably have to stay restrictive through 2024, even as policymakers remain on course to cut rates next month. So a couple of things we need to watch out for. There's going to be a lot of data. Not today, but from Wednesday onwards. We're getting inflation prints from the U.S. and elsewhere, Australia, Japan, the Euro region. And, of course, that means that traders will finesse some of their bets on the outlook for monetary policy. Now, today, what we get, just one piece of data, IFO and the Germany May IFO business confidence coming in a touch below estimates, but actually nothing huge because the estimate was 90.4 and we got 89.3. And a reminder, we'll be speaking to the IFO president, Clemens Furst, a little bit later this hour. Now let's talk to Nannette Hechler-Fayd'herbe from Lombard Odier to talk about the markets. She is Chief Investment Officer for EMEA and Head of Investment Strategy, Sustainability and Research. Nannette, as always, thank you so much for joining us. There's so much talk about what the ECB does next, given that we're very thin trading volumes today. Is there an assumption in the markets that once they cut, and this could be, the Fed, the BOE, actually the ECB, they continue cutting, but the cycle is different, and that's not a given?
I think there are a number of paradigm shifts, Francine, that we on financial markets have to get grips with. One is that politics have made a very big comeback. And to your point, it is not just the economy that is setting the course for inflation, for example, and therefore the reaction by central banks. It is also what is actually causing inflation up and down. So I believe indeed there is going to be more uncertainty associated not only with the trajectory of central banks, but also still elevated interest rate volatility in response.
Nannette, our Oliver Crook, our reporter, was in Stresa at the G7. He also caught up with the Bundesbank president, and this is what he had to say.
What did we really right over the last 2 years is that we really followed the meeting to meeting here understanding, and I believe that should still be the case. So if there's a rate cut in June, we have to wait, and I believe we have to wait till maybe September, I think July. But as I said, it is too early to speculate.
So, Nannette, as you're saying, I mean, this is like we're looking at data by data by data, and it's extremely difficult to see what the tightening over the last 18 months does, I guess, for future growth and future inflation. What does it mean for your appetite for European assets?
I think for European assets, there has been really a better than expected performance, at least as far as equities are concerned, since the beginning of the year. And certainly some good news in terms of the PMIs, as we have seen recently, are going to sustain that trend, especially if the ECB were to cut interest rates in June, as is still likely, and therefore precede the Federal Reserve potentially. Then the euro might weaken, and that would also continue to support export-oriented European equities. But I think that generally speaking, Francine, what we are really interested at in terms of our investment strategy is to use the opportunity of interest rate volatility on the way up and try to lock in some of those attractive yields when we contrast them to equities. So it's a real opportunity to spread investment risk more broadly across multi-asset portfolios.
Nannette, I know you like UK equities. This is a little bit of an outlier call, I would say, also given the UK election dynamics and the fact that we're not really sure when's the next time we'll hear from BOE or when that cut comes. Is this just on valuations?
For sure. If you look at valuations on a forward PE basis, for example, UK equities are trading like emerging markets if you contrast it to the MSCI emerging markets, for example. What is attractive about the UK equity index is that it has a good exposure to energy and the energy sector. So if there is actually a better than expected global economy, this is a sector that is benefiting. However, if there is also a risk of further geopolitical escalation around the world, then the energy sector as well, for different reasons, is going to benefit from higher oil prices as well. So a sector composition that is the right one as far as the UK equity market is concerned, and then really dividend yields and volatility that are attractive by comparison to European equities, less volatile and higher dividend yields. So altogether for us at the moment, a good constellation. The UK elections outlook is probably not over the next 3 months going to change that assessment very much. We are still expecting the Bank of England to cut interest rates, and that is going to support valuations further.
Nannette, I don't know whether there's something in a bubble right now or there's something that actually you're feeling uneasy about, whether it's a Treasury auction, but is there something that has a big question mark on that could turn into some kind of market event?
I think we have to really continue to follow elections very closely. It is a very dense electoral year, and not only with the United States and now also general elections coming around in the UK, but many emerging markets are holding elections as early as this month, June. And so I do think that policy or policy change will have to be something that investors pay very close attention to, precisely because the economy is in a reaction mode. Central banks are in a reaction mode to the political decisions that are being taken. So I am continuing to eye very, very carefully all the important electoral dates as well as the debates, of course.
Nannette, is there something else in the next couple of months? We have a lot of data today, which of course we're looking at for bated breath. I know, gold and copper is one of the things that's getting also a lot of traction. When you look at copper, is it a pure play on, I guess, a China stabilization and the energy transition, or is it also something else?
Yes, I think the whole commodities complex, Francine, has really gotten again into the limelight of investors, because not only does it constitute an alternative asset class that oftentimes has a diversifying property in multi-asset portfolios. Take the example of gold and precious metals in that instance, but it has also those cyclical elements like copper that are currently feeling the tailwinds of structural transformations. These structural transformations are related to the energy transition, the electrification of the economy, and that is happening at a global scale. So I do think that there are also structural reasons to take a hard look at commodities, but I would broaden out the alternative investment interest for investors right now to other asset classes as well. Private assets are giving investors now opportunities that do not exist on the listed side.
Nannette, thank you as always for your invaluable insight. Nannette Hechler-Fayd'herbe there from Lombard. Odier. Now, let's also go back to the G7 that happened over the weekend in Stresa. China's foreign ministry says the G7 are hyping up the nation's overcapacity issue. Now, this comes after the group's finance chiefs intensified criticism of China's trade practices. Now, in a joint communique published after the G7 meeting in Italy, they accused China of hurting the economies of trade partners. Now, let's get more on all of this with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. Ollie, it was an eventful weekend. You had wonderful interviews, of course, throughout the weekend. What was the main take on China?
Yeah, so really there were two objects of this conversation here, and it was really China and Ukraine. On the issue of China, the G7 are really trying to coalesce into sort of a communal view on how to deal with the China question and the overcapacity question, an issue that doesn't have total consensus among the G7, but they're starting to build out the language of what we could see as the potential future sort of lines of a sort of tit-for-tat trade war, right? Because the U.S. is doing certain things, Europe is doing certain things, and depending on who has higher tariffs on what, that could shift capacity from one to the other. So really they're trying to come together with a collective view of things. And we caught up with a French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire. Here's what he had to say about the Chinese issue.
We agree at the G7 level that we have an issue with the Chinese industrial overcapacities. And this is not a question, anything against China. China is an economic partner. But we have an issue with the economic model in which China is producing more and more cheaper industrial devices. Because it could be a threat not only for the EU, not only for the US, but for the global world economy.
So Bruno Le Maire saying we don't have a problem with China, we just have an issue with China. So those who are sort of concerned about a trade war potentially on the horizon, this probably did not do a lot to allay it. On the issue of Ukraine, listen, they still have not figured out the details of the structure of how to unlock the value of those Russian assets. That was really the main function of this meeting here. Now they have just 2.5 weeks to get those details so that they can have that proposal in front of the G7 leaders as they reconvene in Italy in just 2.5 weeks' time.
Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there with the very latest on the G7. I love that. We don't have a problem with China. We just have an issue with China. Coming up, Israel continues its Rafah offensive despite an ICJ ruling that operations should stop to spare civilians. More details next. This is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter and the insights you need. This is a Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the Hamas-run health ministry says at least 40 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike at a camp for displaced people in the southern city of Rafah. Now, the strike came 2 days after the ICJ issued a ruling ordering Israel to halt its operations in order to spare civilians. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Paul Wallace. Paul, so what more do we know about this latest strike?
Hi, Francine. So Palestinian authorities are saying that at least 40 civilians have been killed in the strike. Israel said that it acted on precise and firm intelligence and that it was aiming for a Hamas site. It says it's investigating to see what caused all these deaths. The early sort of indications, at least from the Israeli side, are that it was a fire that broke out from the strike, and that the strike itself wasn't aimed at the precise area where these civilians were. But I think whatever the cause of these deaths is, I think it will just add to tension about Israel's planned full-on assault of Rafah, and it certainly won't go down well with the international community, which almost universally has been urging Israel to back off from these plans to attack the city.
Paul, what's the latest on ceasefire talks?
They may resume this week, but they have been stop-start for weeks and months, pretty much ever since the first and only truce ended in the beginning of December. We've got close at times to a deal, but they just haven't got over the line. The big problem remains that Hamas wants any truce to effectively be permanent and end the war. Israel says that cannot happen, that the war must continue even after a truce of around 6 weeks. The war must continue until Hamas either surrenders or is destroyed as a military organization. And the reason it's so intent on going into Rafah is because it says that's the last bastion of the group and that it has several thousand fighters still there.
All right, Paul, thank you so much, of course, for the important update. Paul Wallace there on the very latest on Israel and Gaza. Now, coming up, you don't want to miss our interview with Clemens, Fuest, the president of the IFO Institute. We talk Germany, we talk the economy, and of course, we talk consumer spending. This is Bloomberg.
South Africa's most important election since the end of apartheid focuses on infrastructure challenges, economic growth, and political fragmentation. Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabasaja reports live from key battlegrounds in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban.
We think that South Africa is an exciting part of the world.
South Africa is a thriving and vibrant democracy.
There's a lot of expectation for the election.
Continuing coverage today on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Now, some of the stories making news headlines today. A Qatar Airways flight has hit severe turbulence over Turkey, injuring 12 people. The Boeing 787 landed safely as scheduled in Dublin, and Qatar Airways says it's investigating the incident. Now, last week, a Singapore Airlines flight made an emergency landing in Bangkok after severe turbulence killed one passenger and injured dozens of others. NVIDIA boss Jensen Huang and a bipartisan delegation of U.S. lawmakers have arrived separately in Taiwan. Now, the legislators are due to meet with President Lai Ching-te. Now, the visits come after China wrapped up its largest military drills around the island in a year. The U.S. has since accused Beijing of military provocation. And Germany's business outlook rose for a fourth month as confidence builds that the country's economic rebound will strengthen over the rest of the year. Well, joining us now is Clemens Fuest. He's president of the IFO Institute, who's in Munich. Mr. Fuest, as always, thank you so much for joining us. How bumpy do you see the German recovery going forward, given that the first quarter was largely, also helped by factors such as good weather, which is unlikely to be repeated?
Correct. Yes, the overall index this month stagnated, but we've seen improvements in the sectors that were struggling during the winter, in particular in manufacturing, but also in construction. So I would say overall that is a good sign, but it's not yet a full recovery. So the German economy is improving, but slowly, I would say.
But manufacturing is better, but do you see a significant turnaround? So it's been lagging, and we've talked about this a lot. It's been lagging the services sector. Do you think the trend for manufacturing is now positive?
Well, I think yes, there is an improvement that will continue. So there is a trend, the change in the trend as well. The trouble is that incoming orders are still relatively weak, so it's not clear how quickly this will continue to improve. So nevertheless, if we look at the data, we've seen improvements for a couple of months now in manufacturing. So this is coming from low levels, but I don't think we will fall back into crisis anytime soon.
How much evidence are you seeing that actually consumption is on the rise, is on the mend, or do you worry that citizens will save too much because of all the geopolitical uncertainty and uncertainty full stop?
Private consumption is a puzzle to some extent because we see disposable incomes improving, and that suggests we should see consumption improving. But as you say, Francine, households seem to be saving. Consumption in the first quarter has declined, although incomes have been improving, so people save more. And maybe that is due to concerns about geopolitical uncertainty, the Ukraine war, maybe also uncertainty about the outlook in Germany, the medium-term outlook, so people are worried and save. So what we hoped for, an improvement in consumption demand in this year to support the economy, it's just not forthcoming.
Mr. Fuest, I mean, one of the other things we're watching is, of course, wage negotiations, especially in Germany. I think the latest round, or German wages grew more than 6% in the first quarter. This is something that the ECB worries about. How do you see wage negotiations and wage pressures going forward in Germany?
Wage pressures will remain because the labor market continues to be tight, a little less than in previous years because the economy has been slow over the winter. But yes, it does continue to be tight and there is no prospect of change. And one answer to that is wage increases. This is a risk for inflation. At the same time, we need those wage increases to make sure that workers go where they are most productive. So we see in Germany, what we see in Germany is still a relatively rigid labor markets where in collective wage settlements, wages are increasing, but we would like to see more dynamism. It is true that this is going to be challenging for monetary policy, but so I think maybe interest rates will stay high for longer also in Europe, because other countries are also having these labor shortages. But I think the answer to that would not be let wages not rise, because we need to make sure that there are incentives to work.
Mr. Furst, as always, thanks so much for joining us. That was, of course, the president of the IFO Institute. Coming up, we're live in Cape Town ahead of South Africa's general elections. We'll be talking to the tourism minister and leader of the Good Party. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike at a camp for displaced people in the southern city of Rafah. That's according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Israel says it used precise intelligence and killed 2 senior Hamas officials. Emmanuel Macron is making a state visit to Germany. That's the first French president to do so in 24 years. Plus, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urges citizens to vote as the nation gears up for its most hotly contested election in 3 decades. We're live in Cape Town for the latest. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, apartheid ended 30 years ago in South Africa, but extreme inequality and poverty remain, casting a shadow over the general election this week. Well, Bloomberg's Tom Gibson takes a look at why the country remains divided along racial lines.
So South Africa is the world's most unequal society.
Around informal settlements, there is no electricity there. Sanitation, it's not that good. There are times there's no water.
You could throw a stone and it would land in one of the highest concentration of wealth areas in the country. On this side, you have one of the darkest, scariest informal settlements and townships in this country. About 10% of the population, which is oftentimes white, owning the range of 80% of the country's wealth.
This was Soweto.
It's been 30 years since the end of apartheid, the structural system of racial segregation that nearly ripped South Africa apart.
We are going forward. The march towards freedom and justice is irreversible.
But for many black South Africans, the story of optimism and renewal associated with Nelson Mandela's coming to power has not materialized. 30 million people, well over half the population, is still living in poverty.
A lot of the failures in transforming this country have often been placed at the feet of the ANC.
The end of apartheid started something special, but it hasn't fully delivered, and that's left ordinary South Africans torn. On the one hand, thankful, having known the horror of life before, but on the other, frustrated with what might and should have been.
Well, that was Bloomberg's Tom Gibson reporting on South Africa's racial divisions. Now, the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is also urging citizens to vote in Wednesday's election. His ruling ANC party risks losing its parliamentary majority for the first time since the end of apartheid in 1994. Pravin Gordhan, the public enterprise minister, says his party will come out on top.
The ANC still, I think, represents the best interest of virtually all South Africans, that it would climb the wave, so to speak, of optimism and come out above 50%. And once again, be given an opportunity to continue to build democracy in this country, to build our economy, and to ensure that the inequality and the divisions in our society are attended to in the ANC way.
Well, let's bring in Bloomberg's Jennifer Zawazaja, who's, of course, in Cape Town, leading our special coverage of the elections, and she's joined by a very important guest. Jen.
Yeah, Fran, good morning to you. I'm standing by with Patricia de Lille. She is the Minister of Tourism here in South Africa, and she's also the Good Party leader, one of the many parties that are contesting in this election. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. So I want to start here with this idea of a coalition, because there's a lot of concern about what a coalition government could potentially look like. You currently serve as part of a smaller party within the ANC. Is this much ado about nothing, the concern, or could this actually work?
Well, I think I depart from the point of view that you might not need a coalition after the elections, but it will be in the space of the party that received the majority of vote to decide who they want to work with. But I'm not in a coalition with the ANC currently. It is part of a culture started by our late President Nelson Mandela, that in every cabinet they always included a leader from the opposition parties. So the late Prince Buthelezi, Mangena, the Freedom Front Plus, many other opposition parties served in cabinet. So, and I was called to serve in the last 5 years, and that's exactly what I've done. But, you know, it's all speculation. I can't wait for the 29th when South Africans will be speaking. And once they have spoken, then it is for parties then to see what the lay of the land is.
Well, what is your expectation, though? Because you were telling us you've canvassed the country quite a bit these past few months. What is your expectation for the outcome?
Well, my expectation is that we must have stability in our country. That one, we need to recognize. I'm not part of the choir that says nothing has changed in this country over the past 30 years. A lot of things have changed. We could have done better years. So my expectation is that we need to all continue to build and reconstruct our country. 30 years in a new democracy is nothing.
Could that mean then the ANC staying in the majority? Could you see that as potentially continuing to progress if we see a different makeup of the ANC?
No, 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 no. I am not interfering in any other political party's business, as saying that I don't want them to interfere with mine. And it's for them to sort out their internal problems. But we must put our faith in the voters. I put my faith in the voters. South Africans are very connected politically. They know exactly what they want. And if the outcome of the elections is that no party gets below 50%, we must respect the wishes of the people. And that's why I'm saying 2 more days to go. And after another week or so, we will know the result. And as South Africans, we have got a history of resilience. We have always overcome many, many difficulties in our past history. And again, I believe that the leadership of this country will rise and make the best of what the choice of the voters produced.
You are part of the leadership as part of President Ramaphosa's cabinet.
Yes.
Or is your expectation to stay on? Is the ministerial post something?
No, not at all. Like I just said to you, every 5 years, you know, the ruling party choose a leader of an opposition party. For the past 30 years, they've done so. I don't expect, you know, to get another turn to do that. It is the prerogative of the president to decide who he wants to choose. If he gives me another opportunity, that's fine, but I will not interfere with his discretion.
Would you say yes, though, if he did ask you?
Well, you know, the tourism sector, I've built up a good relationship with the private sector. I hope whoever's going to take over, continue that, because we've seen the results in the tourism sector with the World Economic Forum Tourism Development Index findings that came out last week shown that South Africa is the most preferred destination in Africa, but it's also 55 out of 119 countries around the world. And so that partnership between the private sector and the public sector, we must continue to nurture that.
And yet we're still not seeing tourism levels back to what they were pre-pandemic. How does that turn? I mean, what is it that needs to happen?
There is a difference. The domestic tourism has almost a year ago surpassed the 2019 figures. On the arrivals of international tourists, there we can see that we are moving up. We welcomed 10.8 million up till the end of March 2024. And there are some obstacles. The obstacles of visas, the obstacle of air access, and if we can attend to those obstacles, I'm sure we will be able to surpass 2090 figures anytime soon.
When do you think that will actually happen? Because that will also help stimulate the economy, which this country largely needs.
Yes, you know, we are about 12% below the 2019 figures. And I've already seen some more direct flights that will be coming to South Africa. I've seen improvement with the visa applications, and I'm working closely with the Minister of Home Affairs to make it easier. We have just also published regulations for nomad tourists, you know, people who want to come and work in live in South Africa and work from here. So we are making progress, and I'm sure that in the next year you will see that improvement with visas, improvement with air access, and then it will stimulate the growth within the tourism sector.
And I also want to talk about improvement in terms of the unemployment figures, yes, right, that we have here, and especially female unemployment, yes, right, because I believe it's north of 40%, 45%, I think is what I was looking, yes, at. I mean, is the president's priorities in the right place to help turn that around, or do you think there needs to be more, especially as a woman who started your own party yourself?
Yes. Well, what you see in South Africa is that the face of poverty is the face of a black woman. And it's mostly women that are unemployed. It's mostly women that don't get paid the same salary than their male counterparts in the private sector. And so women has been left behind. And therefore, in the Department of Tourism, we have got a very deliberate strategy to make sure that we bring more women in and that we empower more women. But in general, the poverty, you know, living below the poverty line, and that's why from the Good Party side, we are calling for an increase or get a basic income grant, because we know the people that need the basic income grant the most are women.
So we'll have to see how that shakes out. We have to leave it there, though. Patricia de Lille, Minister of Tourism here in South Africa, also the Good Party leader. Fran?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Jennifer Zabazaja there joining us from Cape Town, South Africa's tourism minister. Of course, we'll have full coverage throughout the week on the South African elections and, of course, what it means if the ANC needs to rule with something else. Coming up, someone else, another party. Coming up, President Emmanuel Macron on the first French state visit to Germany in 24 years. We'll discuss the challenges of the Franco-German relations. More on that next. And this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire says the G7 is united in its concern over the threat to the global economy from China's industrial overcapacity. Now, speaking from the group's meeting in Italy, Le Maire also confirmed its commitment to funding support for Ukraine.
We are on the right track to get final approval by the G7 leaders summit. The Holy Grail is to ensure long-standing funding for Ukraine. And make no mistake, the G7 countries are fully committed to provide long-standing political and financial support for Ukraine. So there are many options on the table. We will work on those options to find the best one. We need to have the most solid option from both a financial and legal point of view. But I want to leave no uncertainty. We will find an agreement and we will provide to Ukraine the necessary funding.
In terms of China, where would you say that you sort of agree with the United States and disagree with the United States? Where in your approach do you think that there is total synchronicity, and where do you want to see some changes?
We agree at the G7 level that we have an issue with the Chinese industrial overcapacities. And this is not a question, anything against China. China is an economic partner. But we have an issue with the economic model in which China is producing more and more cheaper industrial devices, because it could be a threat not only for the EU, not only for the US, but for the global world economy. And we need to address that issue. Having so many industrial devices for the green industry at a very cheap price on the global market could jeopardize the whole world economy and the growth in the world. So that's why we need to address the issue. We need to engage China, and we need to find solutions.
That was the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire speaking with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. Now, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the creation of a European Capital Markets Union will be a priority during meetings with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, President Macron is in Germany on a state visit where he will attend celebrations marking the 75th anniversary of the German Constitution and hold a joint cabinet meeting on Tuesday with his German counterparts. Now, let's get more on this story with Bloomberg's Christoph Rauwald. Christoph, thank you so much for joining us. So what were the main talking points in Berlin so far?
Yes, one of the main talking points was definitely, as you mentioned, Francine, already, the progress on the capital market union. That's of course like an effort that has been going on for many years, and the progress so far has been pretty muted or limited. So we're still waiting to get a more detailed readout on like what the latest is and if any concrete steps have been confirmed or agreed upon. The other big topic, of course, is related to the challenges that I think Macron also laid out yesterday, the challenges that all of Europe is facing with the changing political landscape, the rise of the far right, and also, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine.
So, Christoph, on Ukraine, I mean, how will that come up in the meetings and common European defense?
I think it will probably be one of the most sort of urgent topics on the agenda, and one key point there, of course, is the ongoing debate about Europe's ability to really defend itself militarily without necessarily relying on the aid from the US when it comes to ammunition, when it comes to equipment. So one of the talking points where we do expect to hear more about is the efforts to come up with an efficient air defense system, which, as we see now in Ukraine, is of utmost importance in case the conflict or the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, is escalating and potentially affects other countries as well.
Christoph, how much do we know about these two leaders actually getting along, and how much does that make a difference in negotiations?
I think it's safe to say that the relationship between Macron and Scholz is slightly more complicated and difficult than it has been between Macron and Scholz's predecessor, German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Nevertheless, both Scholz and Macron did emphasize ahead of the meetings that the reports describing the sort of difficulties were allegedly a bit overdone, and that they actually do get along, and they finally, at the end of the day, do come to joint decisions. But yeah, let's wait and see what the state visit will really yield in terms of concrete results and agreements.
So interesting. As always, thanks so much, Christoph Rauwald, there with the very latest on the first state visit in 24 years. I think the last French president to have a state visit in Germany was Jacques Chirac. Now, coming up, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak promises to bring back national service. How will he pay for it? And will it be enough to ignite his election campaign? More on that next, and this is Bloomberg.
Well, I think a lot of them have decided this is a natural moment at the end of their careers, and politics is very demanding on family life. And I completely understand if someone's been in the cabinet for a very long time, they decide actually they need a change.
So you don't read anything to the sort of very high volume?
I think this is completely normal, actually, I can certainly say that if you do have a cabinet job, it's pretty exhausting. Yeah. So it's not a big surprise if people want to do something, move on. But for me, I'm in there, and I'm going to be staying, and I'm going to be fighting hard for my seat in Godalming and Ash.
And so, talking about sort of the timing of the election, can you talk us through a little bit of the logic there, because it seems to have caught a lot of people off guard?
Well, I think we want to do two things. We want to show the British people that Rishi Sunak knows that we have got a big argument to win, and he is not afraid of that fight. And this is a guy who is very brave, very courageous, very thoughtful. And I think this shows the country that side of his character. He runs into gunfire. He does not run away from it.
UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt speaking to us exclusively on the sidelines of the G7 meeting of finance ministers in Italy over the weekend. Now, staying with the UK, and the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has put forward a programme of national service in one of his first pledges of the election campaign. Let's get more on this with Bloomberg's EMEA News Desk Managing Editor Adam Bledford. Adam, so Rishi Sunak has made this one of his first election campaign announcements. Why? Why is he focused on this, and why is he focused on it now?
Well, good morning, Francine. Both party leaders in the beginning of this election campaign are focusing on core issues like the economy and security, which is a dividing line today, with Labour about to do a campaign event as well. But Rishi Sunak's Conservatives have been trailing Labour for a long time now by considerable distance in opinion polls. And it's thought that advisers close to the Prime Minister have found that the disappearance of Tory support to the right-wing Reform Party could be slightly countered by introducing policies designed to appeal to some of those voters who appear to be leaving the Conservatives behind. This is one of those policies that could resonate with some of those voters, and of course, some of whom are older, and some of whom perhaps look a bit more favourably upon the idea of national service. It's also a policy that has been used and is used in a number of other countries, from Scandinavia across some of Europe and into other parts of the world as well. And so there's a debate there to be had, and the Conservatives think there's a dividing line they can pitch with Labour.
But Adam, there's no money in the coffer. So, what are the chances of this coming into force, and what's been Labour's response?
Well, the chances of it coming into force are, it's interesting because, as I said, the Conservatives are so far behind in the opinion polls. We'll have to wait and see how the election campaign develops and whether those polls narrow into a result. But of course, if the Conservatives don't win the election, the policy won't see the light of day. In terms of paying for it, it's been estimated as a cost of £2.5 billion. There's some suggestion that some of that, a portion of that would be raised by a fund, and some of it will be diverted from Shared Prosperity Fund, which was effectively kind of to counteract some of the post-Brexit funding gaps. So there's, as you say, not much money on the table, and it's going to have to be found some way, and that's something that Labour were already criticising yesterday, and will be continuing to press on.
Okay, we're going to have a lot more election coverage. Adam, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Adam Bledford there, EMEA News Desk Managing Editor. Now, we'll be covering all things UK every week on Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. London time in our half-an-hour special. This is Bloomberg.